What's going on? My name is Dax Hammer, and in today's video, I'm going to break down Leslie Brathwaite's go-to bass plugin and how he uses it in a mix. And I'm also going to detail how he got his low end to sound big and how he got the kick and the bass to sit together in the mix. And it was pretty surprising how he was able to achieve such a solid low end in just a couple simple steps. And that's helpful because so often I'm carving out frequencies and the kick and the bass and just doing so much to get the kick and the bass and the low end to sound right. So it was a breath of fresh air knowing the simplicity in his approach, and it's definitely going to be something that I'm going to try to implement more of. And in his latest Mix with the Masters video, he pulled out this plugin, the Pultec EQP1A, to shape the kick and the bass. And I would play his audio, but I probably would get a copyright strike, so I went ahead and created my own kick drum pattern using a similar kick as well as a similar bass pattern, similar bass. So here's what the kick sounds like. And this is what he said. The first friend that I like to go to is the Pultec. The Pultec is a very meaty, chunky EQ. I usually start off with 60 hertz for kicks and just boost it. So he boosted 60 hertz by 4 dB, and this is what he got. So when he added that 4 dB boost, he didn't do any level matching on the output. He basically said it gave him the feel and the thump that he was looking for, and then he moved on. You know, and so often we hear about the importance of gain staging and level matching and all of that. I definitely agree with, but it was interesting that that approach wasn't taken here. But let's see what it would sound like if we did reduce some of the output level, because louder volumes usually fool us into thinking that it actually sounds better when realistically it doesn't, or it's not as great of an impact as we thought it was. So let's go ahead and bypass the plugin again, cut the output by maybe roughly about 2 dB, and see if we still get that same kind of impact. So here we go with the plugin bypassed. And personally, I think that I might have cut the output a little bit too much, but I still felt that 60 hertz bump, and to me it sounded bigger and better with the volume cut. I was convinced, so let's move on. Now, after that, he added an SPL Transient Designer, and he boosted that by about 1.5 dB, and let's see what the result was. Very, very minuscule. In my opinion, barely audible, but the kick that he did use, in all fairness, did have a little bit more natural click to it on top. So you did perceive a little bit of, extra transient response or transient presence in the kick, but still, even in his example, it was very minimal. But for him, it was exactly what the track needed, and he was convinced that David Guetta, the producer of the track, was going to be impressed by it. Now, before I move on, I will mention something that he said that I do think is really important for engineers to know. I wanted David Guetta, the producer of the track, to have as little to say about the mix as possible. If I send him the mix and he doesn't have anything to say about the kick or the bass, then it's a win. But this is what stood out to me. You want to show that person, in this case the producer, you're tuned into what they're doing. He said he noticed that with David Guetta's kicks, they had a certain attack to them. So the key takeaway here is that he's already mixing to make the end result sound familiar to the producer, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and do things solely his way. So in essence, if there's a sound that's already familiar to the artist or the producer, it would make sense to incorporate those sonic elements in your mix. Okay, so moving on to the bass. One of the things that David Guetta already had printed into his bass track was ducking, which is basically having the bass move out of the way of the kick in volume every single time the kick hits. And this is simply so that the kick has room to hit and be heard, and the bass will come back in fast enough so that the bass can also be heard. So it gives, each element in the mix their own space. And the first plugin that he used to achieve a more solid and dense low end for the bass was the Little Labs Voice of God. And all he did was load up the plugin on its default setting, and this was roughly the difference. Roughly, because this was not the bass that he used. I had to recreate it, but you'll get the picture. Now, you're probably going to have to listen back to that in a good sound system or good quality headphones, but the difference in the low end, like probably 50 hertz and below, is night and day. So the Voice of God plugin is a bass resonance tool. Essentially, it's like a low shelf with a 24 dB per octave slope with a bell boost above that. Now, I'd much rather use this than like a parametric EQ and recreating that slope myself, because honestly, this plugin just sounds amazing. So then he proceeded to put on another EQP1A for the bass track, and all he did was boost about 2 dB. And it seems like he was trying to add in some 60 hertz that he added in with the kick. And when the bass was playing by itself in the song that he was referencing, the 60 hertz wasn't quite as audible in the bass alone. So he wanted to add that in to make sure that, you know, especially where the track is going to be getting played, I'd say more than likely in a club, you may hear that 60 hertz drop out. And in order to keep the groove going and keep the low end solid, he felt that a couple dB boost in that 60 hertz range would give that impression that the bass is still there and still present. So here's what it sounds like before the 60 hertz boost was added. So what I'm going to do is bypass all of the plugins on both tracks, and then I'm going to activate them and see what it sounds like. So here we go with everything bypassed. Much bigger. Now, you know, for me, I might go in and carve other stuff out, and it's just more in my nature to try to get things to sound better and tighter. But this, in terms of achieving a more solid and dense low end, these simple moves definitely did that. So I hope that this video provided some value for you and showed you that sometimes applying even minimal amounts of processing will give you a bigger and better sounding result. And, you know, it does take some thought to think about what frequencies to add, but it kind of like eliminates the extra thinking, the kind of thinking that keeps you stuck in carving out and getting the bass to sound right for 2 hours. Like, it's make a couple moves, progress onto the mix, maybe go back and revisit once you have other elements in the mix. But according to a pro like Leslie Brathwaite, this is, from what the video showed on Mix with the Masters, this is all he did to the low end, and it sounded really good. So the key takeaways in this video are, number one, try to simplify your approach to mixing kick and bass and see if the result is better. Number two, try using heavy and beefy sounding plugins like the Pultec for EQ boosts on the low end. Why? Because it seems to be a lot of mixers' go-to to get a big low end, either just on the kick, just on the bass, or together on the whole mix. And number three, make sure to include familiar sonic elements in the mix for the producer or artist if you know that that's what they're going to expect or like. So if you like this video, make sure that you hit that subscribe button, the like button, and the bell notification icon so that you're notified every single time that a video drops. And that's also going to help the channel grow, so that means more content for you. And that's all that I have for this video. So until next time, may God bless you. Peace.